Hi, I'm Nick. I am I'm creative partner and one of the founders of Halo. We're a strategic brand and creative agency based in Bristol. Don't worry, of course you haven't heard of us. For the last 15 years, we've been absolutely shit at self-promotion, and as you're about to discover, I'm terrible at this sort of thing. But we're totally going to give it a go. Today, I'm going to talk about techniques for creative pitching, and specifically a type of structure that we like to use for certain creative pitches. Before you go, don't creatively pitch, I know that we're not really about creative pitches. I know that on the surface, as an industry, we talk about how difficult and painful and expensive and often not very worthwhile they are. However, you're definitely going to creatively pitch. And the reason you're going to do that is because clients demand it. And that's unfair and la la la. But I think something else in here. We love to go into battle against other agencies. We love the whole gladiatorial environment of the creative pitch. We like to see whether our smarts and our creative ideas are better than the competition. We like to do that. And so often we're drawn into a creative pitch, partly because the client's demanding it, and partly because of our own ego. So at some point, you're definitely going to creatively pitch. I have definitely creatively pitched a lot in my career, to varying degrees of success, of course. I mean, what I would say is where we haven't won a creative pitch, it's because of money, or we've definitely come a close second. Always, that's always been the case. Anyway, I just thought it'd be really interesting to look at one way. And the thing that I'm going to talk about is a technique that we call wow, how, now. Please don't vomit. I know how bad that sounds, but you may have heard of it before. It's a kind of interesting technique because it kind of flies in the face of conventional wisdom in regard to what you should do in a creative pitch. Now, standard creative pitch basically works this way. You go in and you show them some deep knowledge about their category, about their competitive set, about their audience. You start to look at how market forces are impacting on them. You look at where opportunities lie. You look at where the barriers might be. You look at perception. You basically do the rigor behind the creative, and you present a broad understanding of the challenges that they face, and you look at the opportunities they have. Now, that's really important. Showing rigor in strategy is vital. Brilliant. So you kind of cover that part off, and then you start to build towards the creative idea. Now, this is where you get to do the exciting stuff. This is where you probably got maybe a 10-slide sting, which has got some great big text over some cool images, and you kind of building it up, boom, 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 and you feel the tension mounting in the room, and then creative, boom, brand film, boom, press ads, boom, and it's all kicking off, right? Brilliant. And then you thought the ticker tape lands, and everyone's really happy, and you all high five, and that's amazing. The problem is that before you got to the creative, mostly they were fucking bored, and the reason they were bored is not necessarily because you were boring. I absolutely guarantee you weren't boring. You were probably incredibly interesting, and your strategy was totally brilliant. The problem is that they were waiting for you to show some creative, and therefore everything else that you did before you showed the creative was filler. Wow, how now works this way. It basically is predicated on the idea that they don't give a shit about what you're about to say. They want to see pictures. And the reason is because you should have met the client already. Of course you've met the client already. You've probably had a meeting or two. You've definitely had a chemistry session. You've probably had a number of calls to kind of get a really keen understanding of what they're trying to achieve from their brief. And you would have done a ton of investigation into their market, into their competitive set. You would have done a load of research around the audience, and you would have looked at what those triggers actually are for an audience, and how do you move them from consideration into trial, all of those stuff. Yeah, That's really key. As a strategic agency, Halo's entire life is spent trying to build cohesive strategies for clients. However, what I also recognised a long time ago is if I've met that client and I've spent lots of time before the creative pitch, by the time I get to the creative pitch, they just want to see the work. The best thing to think of this as like pop music. Fucking stop boring us and get to the chorus. And if you deliver the creative first, maybe with a couple of slides to build up, but fundamentally deliver the creative in one big, whole, exciting burst at the very front, the anticipation is over. They're not waiting for you to finish talking so they can see some ideas. You've given them the ideas. Now, that is brilliant, because then that's the wow moment done. Because then you can move into how. And if you go into how, that's when you start talking about the strategy. That's when you give them all of your knowledge around their category, around the market, around their audience. It's where you can start to show them all of the rigor that you put in the background and how that relates directly to the strategy that you've built, which led to the creative. It means that you can also show more creative, or you can get into the detail of the creative and you can show them how it connects to a strategy and why that's good and how that works. It's actually important because then you've actually got their attention. They may have fucking hated your creative work, potentially, but actually you get another chance to explain yourself. You get a better chance to put rigor behind that creative at a point where they're now listening to you because the anticipation of what you're going to show is no longer there. So that's really important. And then you go into now. And I think that's really important as well, because you've shown the creative, you've shown all of the thinking and the strategy behind the creative, but actually you've left time to explain what you would do next, what the next stages are, and what those next stages mean. It actually becomes a really interesting thing to do. Because mostly what you do is in a pitch is you've got such a long build up and such a ton of stuff in terms of creative to show that actually you kind of rushed at the end. You might have like, I don't know, let's say they've said half an hour for questions. We all know you're not going to fucking do half an hour of questions because someone's probably booked the room and there's the other agency waiting or whatever. So that's never going to happen. So everyone rushes through at the end. And so actually what you never leave the client with is your roadmap for the next stages. You've never actually told them where you see this going and how you would make it work. And so therefore, they're often left with this long preamble where you've been showing off how clever you are. You've got the big boom moment of the creative, which they were actually waiting for, so they didn't listen to you in the first place. Then they've seen the creative, but actually there's not very much time for questioning anyway, so you can't actually get any rigor involved in that. And then you're kind of rushed out the door and you're hoping that your creative was so good, was so wow, that it doesn't need anything else, that's what they're going to buy. But that isn't how things work. Clients don't buy amazing creative work, not on its own. And they don't buy great strategy on its own. What they really buy is the potential that you offer. And that's the potential to be a great partner. That's a potential to be someone who they can work with, who will deliver to them fresh thinking and new ideas which they haven't got the time or haven't got the ability to have because they're kind of stuck in the day-to-day of it all. That's the joy of being in an agency, right? So, Wow How Now delivers what they want to see in a creative pitch up front immediately, taking away any of that the preamble anticipation problem. When you get into the how, because you're relating it directly back to that creative, it's still a creative part of the pitch. It's still got visuals which are really interesting and are about them. But then you can kind of draw out that strategy and all of that really interesting insight that you've brought, and you're able to show that you've actually done your homework and you actually gave a shit, and you've built in time to explain to them what you as an agency would do as a partner in real life to bring this to fruition. I can't actually say that, fruition. Anyway, you know what I mean. I've found in the last 15 years that the most successful pitches I've ever had are using wow, how, and now. And although every time I say those words out loud, I kind of get a bit sick in my mouth, it's incredibly effective. It does take quite a lot of bollocks to do it. Mainly because you've been trained not to do it. We've been trained to deliver this sort of long form narrative which has some pictures midway through. By rejecting that form of pitching, it's actually quite empowering. It also disarms a room very quickly. I've found it to be, it sometimes feels really risky to do it, but believe me, not all the time, but a whole big chunk of time, it will always work better than the long preamble. So, this might be a bunch of shit, and feel free to ignore it. I apologise for being really average. But anyway, good luck.